Good afternoon. My name is Ed Sachs, and I am president of my collaborative team. Welcome to this special Collaborate panel discussion. On the bottom of the screen, you will see a chat button. If you wish to ask questions, please do so through the chat. If you're having any issues, please post to the chat, and our webmaster will respond, or send an email to webmaster@mycollaborativeteam.com. Now, I'd like to take a minute to tell you about my collaborative team. My collaborative team is a not-for-profit corporation. Our mission is to provide marketing and educational opportunities for our members in building more successful collaborative practices, utilizing our digital and virtual marketing outlets. The main goal of my collaborative team is to be the leading publisher and producer of collaborative process content and to be a marketing partner for our members. We provide our members the confidence, assistance, and platforms they need to distinguish themselves as collaborative professionals. Our newsletter is distributed to over 12,000 families professionals across North America, including 6,000 collaboratively trained lawyers, mental health professionals, and financial professionals 2 times per week. We invite you to check out our website at www.mycollaborativeteam.com. We hope you will join us and support what we are doing. Today's panel discussion, We've Got the Goods, Who's Buying Them? How to Get More Collaborative Cases by Educating Potential Clients, came about as a result of discussions on our Friday happy hour about how to make cases. Too often, we hear family attorneys complain that they aren't getting collaborative cases. My answer to that usually begins with a question. Do you have potential clients contacting you, and are you setting up consultations? If so, then it's up to you to educate the client on the availability and the virtues of the collaborative process. It's up to you to educate them. Today, we hope to show you how to do just that. Now, let me introduce our panelists. Neil Kozek is a founding member of the firm of Kramer Kozek LLP, who practices in both suburban Westchester, White Plains, and New York City. Neil is an experienced attorney who's litigated almost exclusively in the field of matrimonial and family law for more than 32 years. He was a member of the board of directors of the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, and he is also a founding member and past president of the New York Association of Collaborative Professionals, where he served on the executive committee and board of directors for 18 years. Carol Ann Mazza is a family attorney and Florida Supreme Court certified family law mediator who helps divorcing couples and families in conflict handle their conflicts in a healthier way. She works solely with couples who choose out-of-court processes to find durable, lasting resolution as they transition into the new phases of their lives. Carol Ann is a member of the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, the Florida Academy of Collaborative Professionals, the Collaborative Family Law Institute, the Collaborative Family Law Professionals of South Florida, the South Palm Beach Collaborative Law Group, and the Florida Association of Conciliation Courts. She's also a founder of my collaborative team. Ann Cameron has been an attorney since 2000 after attending law school at the University of Utah. Originally from California, Ann attended the University of California, San Diego, and Dartmouth College for her undergraduate studies and San Diego State University for her teaching credential. In 2008, Ann underwent collaborative divorce training, and she has since incorporated collaborative strategies into her cases whenever possible. Ann started her own practice in the summer of 2015, focusing on all aspects of family law and criminal defense. In 2018, she changed her practice to focus on collaborative family law and reduced conflict family law, and is now the president of the Utah Association of Collaborative Professionals. Dr. Randy Heller received her doctorate in family therapy from Nova Southeastern University. She's now a licensed mental health counselor, licensed marriage and family therapist, certified Supreme Court family mediator, qualified parenting coordinator, certified hypnotherapist, as well as founder and clinical director of the Family Network Collaborative Counseling Center for Positive Growth and Change, established in 1994. She is a member of the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals and the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts. She serves as a board member of the Florida Academy of Collaborative Professionals, past president and board member of the Collaborative Family Law Professionals in South Florida, and an active member on the Research and Access to Collaboration Committees of the IACP. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Carol Hughes is a psychotherapist in clinical practice, working with divorcing couples and their children since 1983, and is one of the founding members of Collaborative Divorce Solutions of Orange County, California. Her professional mission statement, which is to assist as many people as possible heal and empower themselves, comes to fruition in the collaborative divorce process. Carol has just co-authored a groundbreaking book on gray divorce titled Home Will Never Be the Same Again. So let's get started first with Neil.
Thanks, Ed. So just a word on our panel. It's interesting that the panel was chosen that we have 3 attorneys, 2 mental health professionals, and 1 financial neutral. That seems to mimic the composition both of the IACP and of most practice groups throughout North America. This panel has both diversity in geography as well as in practice. And I think that what we benefit by in this webinar is that those perspectives are going to be shared from each of our own experiences. I'm going to be speaking about my experience as a matrimonial attorney, still practicing in litigation, mediation, and collaborative practice. So the initial consultation is where introduction of collaborative practice typically begins, and a consultation typically begins, for me, with a telephone call. There are basic questions that we ask on the phone and basic information that we obtain. Who referred this person to us? Where do they live? Do they have children? I'll ask, tell me a bit about your family. What are your children's ages? Where are they in school? Tell me about your spouse. What is your spouse's name? In that initial call, I will talk to people about process choice. And by that, I mean, what are the processes for divorce separation and for understanding how these people are going to move forward in their lives? And the 3 choices that I typically speak about are the ones I just mentioned, collaborative, mediation, and the litigation traditional model. We typically talk about general questions, and then ultimately, if they feel comfortable, we'll schedule an in-person, or as it were, 5 months, a virtual consultation. The structure of a consultation for me is basically the same for every client. The 2 things that I think are most important in an initial consultation are me getting to know the client and the client getting to know me. I will typically educate clients about the same things, no matter what process choice they're going to be in. I talk to them about the 3 processes and what they mean and how they work. And then I talk to them about substance. There are legal issues, financial issues, and custodial issues in almost every case. What I don't want to do is I don't want to be that lawyer that tries to squeeze a square peg into a round hole. So part of what I do in an initial consultation is assess what process I think meets a particular client most. And I do that by asking questions and answering their questions. And the trick is to not make the decision for the client, but to let the client make the decision for him or herself. Slide 2. So in an initial consultation, we're going to talk about the collaborative process, the interdisciplinary model and benefit of having the different professions involved, discussing ourselves as professionals, what is my experience and what is my expertise in the area of litigation, mediation, or collaborative practice, and how I see myself in the collaborative world. I think this helps for the clients to understand who we are, and it begins a trusting relationship and a rapport. Anne?
Hello, everyone. My name's Ann Cameron, and I actually have a practice that I only practice collaborative family law and mediation now. I take no more litigation cases. It will take some cases that are on the litigation track through on a limited scope basis through mediation, but I no longer go to court. And I've worked on cultivating that reputation as what my practice is. So I'm going to speak about the mindset and establishing the mood with clients, about whether or not they're well suited to participate in the collaborative process. And the way it starts in my office, when people call, my assistant is also trained in collaborative law. So she has the vocabulary, she understands the process, she understands the mentality of what we are doing. So when I initially transitioned out of litigation, it was a 2-year transition process. During that transition, when new clients would call, my assistant would tell them that my litigation calendar was full, but that I had room in my collaborative calendar. Or I also have what I call a single sitting divorce consultation, which is a set fee, 2 hours. It's a little bit reduced rate from my hourly rate. But then I don't represent anybody moving forward unless they want to go into the collaborative process. We can talk about that. And in that consultation, I talk about the mediation track, litigation, and collaboration. But so when clients come in for their initial meeting with me, they've already spoken with my assistant about the type of work that I do and how I do my work. She gets a lot of their initial information about their spouse, children, assets, debts, all that kind of stuff. What are the issues going to be? Then when they actually come into my office, they start by watching the IACP 20-minute video, which is the case study from Canada about a collaborative case. And before they even get to talk to me, they sit in the conference room, they watch that video. Then when I go in to join them, I just ask them about their experience watching that video. How did that work for them? What do they think about it? And 100% of them say, that is how I would like to proceed with my case. I would like to do it that way. And then a significant portion of them say, but my spouse won't do it. Or I don't know how we'll get my spouse to do that. And we talk about that, and I say, I've got some skills and strategies for how we can enlist your spouse in this process if it's going to be right for your family. So we establish the collaborative process as being the primary focus, or the primary way that I would go about doing it, instead of having it be an add-on after talking about what litigation looks like and then saying, or you can do it in the collaborative process. It's front and center as far as how we go about doing it. So that really sets the mood. And almost everyone who walks into my office says that is what they would like to do. And that's how we're going to go forward with it. We handle very high conflict cases that way, as well as much more amicable resolutions or amicable parties moving through. So the mood and mindset in my office is that this is likely going to be the best way to preserve what relationships remain in your family and to cultivate more effective communication for the family. So believing, we're back to the slide, believing in this process is huge. And having clients actually watch a video of a family that has really done or has gone through the collaborative process helps them buy into it. There's also another video that I use. It's 5 minutes, and I think it's Swedish, and there's music, no words, about what happens when there's family conflict, what happens to the children, and the world breaks apart and the children fall in. That'll get their attention too if they are a little too fighty. But that's what we do, is we set the mood. Like, this is how we can do this, and it can be a peacemaking way that your family can move forward. So mood and mindset are really well established in my office. My assistant has it, I have it. We'll talk about the office environment a little bit later, of how we've cultivated that to invite a more Zen-like experience as we go through this. But yeah, I think because that's my mood, I won't go to court anymore. It was making me sick physically. And so I had to make a change in my life. And so I did. And I believe that the divorce community is going to benefit from that change.
Great. Thank you, Ann. Carol Ann, how do you set the mood? Carol Ann? Okay, we may have lost Carol Ann. She's actually joined us from Italy, so she'll try to rejoin us. Randy, tell us how you set the mood.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to have you here. So for me as a therapist, and particularly as a marriage and family therapist, I find that we as marriage and family therapists are really on the front lines with people who aren't going to make it in their marriages. And so from the very beginning, when I'm working with a couple, I will kind of get the sense of where they're headed. And if I get the sense that they're headed toward divorce, then I start talking about collaborative divorce and other options for alternative dispute resolution, even before they bring up divorce. But I plant those seeds very, very early on, because I find that one person, as we know, is usually way ahead of the other. And the reason I'm planting those seeds early on is because I don't want to see them running out to the heaviest hitter litigator that they can find, even while they're in marriage counseling and sensing that it's not going to work. So I do start talking about that. Of course, I don't participate on their matters. That's another whole topic if I am steering them in that direction. However, that is how I set the context for them to be what I know they want to be. So I believe in everybody's need and desire to be their best self, to have peace in their life, to do the right thing, to take care of their children. And so I build on those ideas when I'm speaking to them about the collaborative divorce process. I'm building on what is it going to take for you to move forward in your life in a way that you're proud of, in a way that you feel good about, in a way that you can then move on in your life and heal and ultimately engage in other relationships without the bitterness, the anger, the resentment. So I go beneath the process idea, and I really go to the humanness, if you will, of every individual who I'm talking with. I wrote my dissertation on the role of a mental health professional working in collaborative practice. And I also use the research, my own and the research that I build upon, to talk with clients about the benefits of an alternative process, the benefits of collaborative practice, the benefits of working things out and being able to co-parent effectively, the benefits for their children. And I have substance behind me. Again, my own research, and there's a lot of research out there on conflict and what that does to people health-wise, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and relationally. And so I really punctuate those ideas. When I'm talking like I am now. It's a passion of mine. I speak about it with conviction. I speak about it with knowledge. I speak about it with the right attitude. And it's something that they come to want. They come to want to do the right thing and be their best selves, even in the midst of anger and frustration and wanting to get the other person back, because underneath that all, I believe they want peace. And so that's where we go with that.
Great. Thanks, Randy. Carol, we have you back from Italy. Carol Ann, tell us how you set the mood.
Hello, everybody.
So tell us how you set the mood.
Yeah,
Carol.
so like Anne, right,
Yes.
Can you hear me? I hope you can hear me. Just like my colleague Anne, I am my practice is completely out of court. I am a solo practitioner in every sense of the word. I answer the phone, I make my own coffee, do everything. So I really have a lot of contact with the client. I'm not going to repeat what Neil and Ann said because a lot of what they talked about resonates with me as well. But I think what's really important for me is I stopped litigating probably 10 years ago now. And like Ann, it didn't sit with me. And as I've continued my practice and experience, I realized that the clients are the experts. They don't really know that. They don't understand that. And it's amazing to me how many people come to my office or talk to me and they don't understand that they have choices in the processes that they choose. I think that a lot of people still think divorce is something that's done to them, not that they have any active part in. So it's really important for me to talk to them about how they want to make the decisions that have to be made when you're divorcing, because that really is what divorce is about. It's a series of decisions that have to be made. I tell them right off the bat that I do not litigate. I tell them that on the phone. I can't think of one person who has not come in for a consultation. My consultation is very heavily process oriented. Although I do a lot less talking now. My husband may not agree with that, but in my consultations I do. I listen, asking lots of questions, really trying to get to know and what it is, what's you. A lot of they come in and, there are certain things that they want to know. And I have found throughout my practice, I don't know if I'm being heard. I might be a little bit choppy here. Am I getting a thumbs up?
We're gonna go to Carol.
Technology is wonderful.
Yeah, Carol Ann,
I'm going to keep talking until somebody.
We'll get back to Carol Ann. Sorry about that. Carol, tell us how you set the mood.
Yes. So I came to Collaborative in 2003. And from that time forward, my divorce side of my practice, I'm a therapist too, as is Randy. And I do a lot of the same things Randy described, so I'm not going to repeat that. But from day one, as soon as I was trained, I got the idea that my name of my divorce side of my practice was Divorce Peacemaking. And that's the name of my website also for my divorce services. And anytime I write an article, a blog, advertising, speak, I talk about family-focused divorce services and educate people about what the divorce coach does, what the child specialist does, or a family coach. Sometimes we have a one-coach model. And my referral sources, contrary to how it is for the attorneys, often I would say that most of my referrals who do a consultation with me have already thought about that they want to do an out-of-court, family-focused divorce process, because many times our collaborative attorneys refer potential clients to me to talk about what the mental health professionals do in the divorce process. So I educate, much as the others who've already spoken, about the benefits of a family-focused, out-of-court, peaceful, respectful divorce process is. And I share research, as Randy, and the research that consensual dispute resolution is better for families, and the agreements that the parents make are usually more durable, and the parents and the children are better off, and they're more well adjusted. So I share all of those things. Neil mentioned building trust in the relationship, again, because my referrals come from my own colleagues who know I do this work, or maybe I've done a divorce options presentation at a local college. They've already developed a little bit of a relationship, trusting relationship with me, because they've either heard me speak or someone they trust has referred them. I made a couple of other notes. And often it does begin with the first phone call or an email. But again, that trusting relationship is partly already established because of how they come in to my practice.
Great. Randy, you had a quick comment?
Yeah, a quick comment that I think everyone will find interesting that I picked up in my own research and in other research. I tell clients that the research is now documenting the notion that children from divorced families where there is a good, strong co-parenting relationship and an amicable resolution and things are working well, these children will actually do better than children from intact families in life in terms of their emotional intelligence. I stress the fact that we don't go out and say, you know, get divorced and your children will be better. But it's a very interesting tidbit. And every time I say it, people's eyes widen open. Because if you think about it, these kids have to learn to be resilient, to be adaptable, to be flexible, which are all of the key ingredients to building emotional intelligence. They have to learn that they can love both parents and not be in the middle, and all of the things that they can accomplish when they're involved with parents who are working well together. And so that's another thing that I stress, which makes them, again, want to be their best selves and want to do the best thing for their children. So it's just interesting to know.
Great. Thank you, Randy. And I, as a financial professional whose only practice, my only practice is in collaborative divorce. So I don't see clients. I don't have tax clients for people. Certainly don't have an office, but one in my home. I set the mood through my website and through my speaking engagements and through my newsletter. And I really set the mood so that if somebody's contacting me or if somebody's been referred to me, they're going to see right up front that all about collaborative. So that's how I set the mood, and it's really important that everyone sets their mood even before the people get into your office. What is the first thing most people see about you? Most likely they Googled you. So make sure that you're out there and make sure that what they see when they go to your website is in fact collaborative. The next part of our discussion is going to be how to make the connection with the client. You've now hopefully set the mood both with your office, with your initial phone call, with some initial discussion that you've had. So the question becomes, how do you now make the connection with the client? For that, we're going to start with our mental health professionals, Randy and Carol.
Yeah, so again, I talk a lot about my experience as a therapist and my experience working with the casualties of divorce before I became involved in this movement, if you will, knowing how people are when they go through divorce wars. So whether it's the adults and how they're handling their relationships post-divorce, whether it's kids and what happened to them from going through a divorce war with their parents or being in the middle of one as I'm seeing them. I talk a lot with them about the perils of that. And again, how they can be better and do better and heal, finding peace. My initial connection, I think, starts before they enter my office, like you said, Ed, whether it's on the phone or even on my office door, there's a sign that says peacemaking begins right here. And so much like we all do, we promote that idea. And my website as well. But connecting with them, as I said earlier, is really connecting with them about what they truly want and need. And that comes to my that comes to me from understanding where they're coming from. So it's about asking the right questions. It's about understanding what they're most afraid of. It's about normalizing their fears and even their anger. And yeah, they'd like to kill that other person or get that other person back because they hurt them or they wounded them or they betrayed them. But to really help them to know that doing that is like drinking poison and hoping the other person will die. That it's they who are going to suffer if they continue to hold on to that anger and that resentment, and that in some ways they will someday see this as a gift, that being with someone who isn't treating you right or isn't good and isn't making you happy is really the better option. And then we talk about the best of the better option being divorced. I also talk with them about my personal story. And I think that that is really important. And anybody who reads the first chapter of my dissertation will know I come from a legacy of divorce. And I've been divorced twice. So my second divorce is really what led me to this collaborative movement, because it really destroyed the relationship between my daughter and her stepfather. It destroyed all of our extended family relationships. And it was financially devastating and ridiculous at the same time. And so subsequent to that, I knew there had to be a better way. And so I reflect on my own fears, my own doubt, my own sense of shame, my own sense of guilt, and why I felt the need to go get the heaviest hitter attorney that I could to make things right, which never happened. And so I think we can all share some kind of a war story, whether it's our own or whether it's from what we know from working in this field. And when we do that, I think people see us as human. They don't see me just talking from a textbook. They don't see me just trying to sell the process, if you will. I'm talking to them from my own experience and what I know from the clients who I see to my own life. And I think that really makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Carol?
Very well said. Thank you. I start out by asking them to share with me what are their hopes, their dreams, their goals, and their fears about going through the divorce process. And so I'm basically mining for their interests, as we call it. And then I build from there so that they hear right away that I'm interested in what they want. And as Randy said, I don't sell collaborative either, because they need to discover, as we're working together the first time or two, what it is that collaborative can do to help meet the needs and goals and interests that they have, so that they end up choosing collaborative, not me telling them that's what they need. Another tool that I use is asking what we in therapy world call the miracle question. If they have trouble saying what their fears, hopes, goals, and so forth are, their values, I ask them, just imagine with me for a moment, you're 5 years down the road after your divorce, and you're telling a friend or family member how successful your divorce was, and why was it so successful? What would it look like? What would I hear you talking about to that friend or family member? And a lot of times they stop and are really thinking about that. And most people don't say, I want to kill my ex-spouse, or I want to destroy my kids. And I remind them of that when they're answering that miracle question. And already they're really getting the value of what an out-of-court, dignified, respectful process can do for them and all their relationships and for their children. And then I share research or whatever else is important that I think would help them really grasp and solidify their choice as an out-of-court process collaborative.
Great. Thank you, Carol.
Mm-hmm.
So as a financial professional, the way I connect is, first of all, I want to know what their goals are. And I think when they hear that coming from a financial professional, sometimes they, take aback to it. They almost are surprised that is what I'm interested in, is what are their goals? What are they hoping to get to at the end of the rainbow? But the number one thing that I try to do, and when I'm just talking to people as a financial professional, is provide comfort. I recognize that they have lots of fears, and I recognize that most of their fears probably are circled around the finances. I make sure and just talk to them to understand what those fears might be. I want them to know that I understand that finances can be very scary. So I try to provide them comfort, and I comfort them not only in understanding and letting them know I understand what their fears are, especially as it relates to the finances, but that my only role in this process, or my biggest role in this process, is to make sure that they understand the finances, that I've educated them so that they don't have any fears, so that the finances become less scary. Because we know that oftentimes both parties have fears. There's a fear of the unknown financial future. How am I going to make it in the future? And I promise them that through this process, I will get them to at least understand. They may still have fears at the end. I can't take away the reality of the finances, but at least they won't have the fear of the unknown. They will have complete knowledge of what to expect in the future. So I find that that gains their trust, that gains them their understanding into the process, and it, again, makes them more comfortable. So now let's hear how our attorneys make the connection. We'll start with Ann.
Hello, everyone. So part of how I connect when I have the clients in my office is both through strategic conversation as well as the actual office environment. I have an aversion to fluorescent lights, as does my assistant. We both get headaches. So we have engineered our office to be lit entirely with either incandescent lights or other lights that are softer, and floor lamps and table lamps and things like that. And then we had the opportunity to have our office recarpeted, and I had a choice of AstroTurf essentially, or this aubergine carpet. So we have dark purple carpet, which is not optimal. So it's all covered with faux oriental rugs, which has really cultivated and generated a very warm environment. I have club chairs. I have lots of comfortable seating arrangements, lots of refreshments and things like that. So it's very zen when you initially walk in. There's a coffee station, snacks, all sorts of things that I would have in my home if I had people coming over to make them feel more comfortable. I try to be a nice hostess. So we set that environment so that it is not that initial prickly attorney's office. And then as we sit in the conference room and talk about the family situation and how we're going to reorganize the family and whether or not I'm going to be their guide for that, one of the first things that usually comes up is their neighbor, their relative, their whomever said, I need to get 50% of the kids, I need to get 50% of the assets, I should get the house, blah, 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 or spouse should get the house or whatever. We have to sell everything and nobody can move. And there are all these absolute legal perspective rights. And so I try to transition that conversation from what they need. If they say, I need 50-50 parent time. And I say, well, okay, what does that mean to you? And why? And well, because it should be equal. I'm like, oh, okay. So why? And I work them into what is their interest. And what most of the time what the interest is they want their children to thrive and they want their children to have a healthy relationship with both parents. And if one parent or the other isn't really capable of having that healthy relationship, we figure out what might help to make that relationship more helpful and how we could investigate or initiate that process. So we transition into rights. We want to be financially viable. We want to be, maximize our time with our kids. We want our kids, if they were going to write the story of our divorce, to be able to write something that says, my parents did this well, and we reorganized our family, and both parents love me, both parents care about me, both parents support me, all that kind of stuff. So switching from this rights-based conversation into an interest-based conversation is extremely helpful. And then I'll explore with them. Like, does your spouse or partner or whatever share those interests? Is that something that we might be able to agree on, that we have those interests in, or you have those interests in common? And if they do, then we're setting up for a wonderful collaborative conversation and process. So I think it's a combination of how that conversation goes. Sure, I'll talk to them about, if you were in a litigation setting, these are the lane lines for what it might look like. But if we're going to approach this collaboratively, let's talk about what your interests are. And then we always, like, I make a spreadsheet when we're in the process, so we can always revisit if the conversation gets kind of off. And even when I'm meeting with my client, if they start getting that fighty, angry thing, I will ask if that is benefiting what their actual interest is, or is it just something where they need to be heard? And if they just need to be heard, then talk away. But I always direct it back to the interest in this environment that I'm hopeful creates a safe place for them to actually get in touch with what their interests are. So that is how I connect, I hope.
Carol Ann, how do you connect? Carol Ann, not well again. Neil, Neil, how do you connect?
So for me, speaking as an attorney, one of the things that we're really never taught in law school is awareness. Awareness of others and what they're saying and doing, and awareness of what we are doing, feeling, and what we are saying. And it follows up on something Randy spoke about briefly earlier, and that is the emotional intelligence piece of what we do as professionals. A lot of what happens in an initial consultation is nonverbal. So I believe that my nonverbal communication is as important, if not more important, than some of the things that we actually say. Reading the room is also very important. And what it comes down to is communication basics that we're all taught in our initial collaborative training. If you think about the concept of looping and the concept of reflective listening and getting to know somebody, somebody earlier talked about understanding where a client is coming from and meeting them where they are. The ability to let that client know that you understand them and that you understand the issues presented goes a long way toward making a connection with them. And for me, that rapport and that connection is what establishes trust. So before we can get a collaborative case, or for that matter, any case, we need to sell ourselves. And we need to sell ourselves as somebody that this client can work with in any process, that this client trusts because this client feels that you know what you're talking about and that you're authoritative in your information, that you've answered questions clearly and unambiguously. We will ask more questions to get a better understanding of what it is that's going on for that person. And when you communicate to a client that you understand what's happening, something happens in the brain. I think biochemically, I think neuropsychologists talk about the same kind of chemical reaction happens for a person when they feel understood as it does when they feel agreed with. And I'm not saying you have to agree with everything a client says, but you do have to understand what they're saying. So making that connection is the first step toward getting them into a collaborative process, because it's the first step of getting them as a client for yourself.
Great. Thank you, Neil. Carol Ann, we'll give you one more try. Are you there?
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Carol Ann?
Okay, well, thanks for your patience, everybody. Neil, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Carol Ann.
Can you hear me? No?
Yeah.
This is not meant to be today. Hello.
We hear you.
Not meant to be today, huh?
Yes,
Can
we
you hear
hear
me?
you. Yes.
No, huh? You can't hear me?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on. And so now that we have some idea about how we come across, okay, we know this is the greatest opportunity to help the client. Okay, so what is it that we do talk about? What is it that we discuss in helping the client get to the collaborative process? Let's start with let's start with Neil.
Great. So for me, the consultation is the greatest opportunity to help the client in a way because it's the first opportunity that you have to let the client know they have support and that you're gathering information, but understand they're also gathering information. They're coming into your office and they've got a number of questions. They want to know about the law. They want to know about who you are. They want to know how this is going to happen. And more often, they don't realize that what they're really looking for is knowledge, because knowledge is power. And when you walk into a lawyer's office for the first time not knowing what this is going to look like, there's a lot of fear. And in order to quell that fear, I think the lawyer has the ability and the greatest opportunity to educate the client so that they leave your office feeling better than they did when they walked in. So we gather information in order to formulate for ourselves a strategy. What does this client need? What issues are relevant to their life? They come and they give us information. So it's an exchange of information between the client and the attorney. I always want the client to leave my office feeling better than they did when they came. And if they have a plan, at least for the next step or the next step or the next, they're not going to know what they're going to do for the rest of their life. But if they know what the next step is, then they're going to be in a position to lose some of that anxiety that they came in with. And in creating a strategy, it's not just whether it's a litigated strategy or a collaborative strategy or a mediation strategy. It may be something as simple as having a conversation with their spouse. And if they feel that they can take that next step, then you've done a very good job in creating the first stage of trust building and rapport. Because and let's talk specifically about collaborative, what I might do. There are ways to introduce the spouse to the collaborative process. It can either be a letter that's written, it can be talking to your client and giving them some brochures, and then even doing like a mock conversation where you role play. I'm your spouse. What would you say? What do you think I should say? And I get an idea from this client about what the spouse is like. And then we talk about options for how that client can introduce the topic in a way that most appeals to the spouse. In order to do that, you have to get information about the spouse. So that's part of information gathering that I would do. I could say a lot more about that, but it really depends on each client. But that's how I will initially approach that stage of the collaboration.
Great, thanks, Neil. Randy, you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I was going to suggest that as a mental health professional, one might not think that we are well-versed enough to discuss divorce options with clients. And I would suggest to any of you that we in fact are, and if we're not, then become more well-versed, and do so by programs such as this, taking a lawyer to lunch, meeting with your teams and discussing ways to talk about this with your clients. But I think the benefit of them speaking with a neutral is that we are setting the context for neutrality. We're not being hired by one or the other. We're being hired by both, whether as a mediator, I work as a mediator, or as a collaborative professional. And I often, if not always, will encourage that my first consultation with them is together. So if I speak with them on the phone, I will invite them to come in together. And that, for me, is a real important clue from the get-go of how they do together. I do that because I think it's very important to see the interaction pattern between them. I do that because I think it's very important to set the context for neutrality so that one doesn't think I have their ear and then I'm going to meet with the other and my mind's already made up about whose fault this is and who did the right thing or the wrong thing, etc. And so I always encourage, I'll say always, encourage that they will come in together. I don't always do that if they're very opposed to that. But if they don't come in together, then I will contact, with their permission, the other person. I actually have a situation now where a lawyer called me and asked me if I would contact the husband's wife to help engage her in the collaborative process. So by the way, I'll do that at no charge. And I first spoke to the husband, got a sense of the wife. And then what I did was I asked him to either send a text or an email copying me, which invites me into the conversation. And then I will speak with her about what I see as the benefits and the different process options that are available to her. So again, I think it's really, really important that we set the context for neutrality, that we help them to understand the benefits and the shortcomings of some of the processes, of all of the processes for them, if you will, and help them to make the choice. And it's all about them making the choice. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but them making the choice that really fits for them. And I think they often do make the right choice. The other thing is, if there's children, bring those children into the conversation and how they will benefit. I think Anne mentioned it before, someone did. You know, I always say, how do you want your children to talk about their parents' divorce and how they manage? One other thing I want to say is that I firmly believe that even after they decide that collaborative is for them, in many instances, I've had clients really still not get the distinctions between mediating and collaborating. And so I think that's really key, that we help them to understand the distinctions between the processes. And I know that the attorneys really do this well, and the financial professional, I'm sure, but I think they need to hear it once, they need to hear it again, and they need to hear it again, because even when they sit down at the first collaborative meeting, sometimes they're just not getting the real distinctions. So,
Anne, you want to share with us what you talk about with your client?
Oh, sure. As far as the law goes and the process, I absolutely will. Well, Utah is an equitable distribution state, which means whatever you want to make equitable be. The default is obviously 50-50, but the court has the opportunity to do whatever they do believe is equitable. And that depends on the personality of the judge. So we talk about that, like the basis in Utah is equitable. And so we have lane lines for what you can do, what you can't do, and they're pretty darned wide. So Utah requires mediation before you go to trial anyway. 95% of cases do resolve in mediation anyway. So the resolution is what the parties decide is going to be equitable with the assistance of the mediator and their attorneys if they're in an adversarial context. So that being said, I mean, I will let them know what the statutes, the thresholds are for parent time, custody, co-parenting, division of assets, division of retirements, division of debts, etc. And then I talk about how in the collaborative context, we use those same lane lines, but we don't use the statutes and the code and the case law as our fallback for the what if we can't come to an agreement on this. Like for parent time, we don't know what the court would do. Boundaries of what the court would do is over here. The judge may or may not do that, but we really try to focus on what do you want to do for your kids? Like, we don't use the courts as the fallback. We don't say the judge would do this, the judge would do that, unless we get to push comes to shove, or unless there's a very specific question. And then it's couched in were you in a litigation setting? This is likely the fallback. And if we're in a collaborative meeting, the two attorneys will actually talk about what their experiences are with it. So we do a lot of education on the law, the things that have to be done in order to navigate a divorce in Utah. But then we direct it back to being interest-based instead of the fallback with litigation, so that it takes away the threat sensation. And that's what I've heard from a lot of clients is like, we don't have the threat of going to court. So, I mean, and every once in a while, somebody does have to play that card and make the threat. If we can't get this solved, we'll go this way. And then it's a roll of the dice. But so letting your clients know that you have a significant command of the law is essential. And then why we opt to not use that as the fallback for how we cultivate their solution, I think is also quite essential, because they're not backed into a corner. So,
great, thanks, Ann. Eric, the next slide, please. So let's move on to the next slide. I'm sorry. So when we talk about connecting with the client, we talk about sharing our stories, undermining our details, asking questions. What I'd like to hear now from the attorneys especially, and then I'll come to our MHPs. We heard an interesting discussion on our happy hour this past Friday, literally about the order in which you talk to people to your consultation. So I'd like to hear both from Neil and from Ann. Is there a certain order that you follow when you're in a consultation? What we heard certainly on Friday from a practitioner in New Jersey was that she kind of leaves collaborative till last, the most important till last. Is there a certain order that you go about, Neil?
Well, there's an order that I do to every consultation. It's the beginning where I gather information about the person's life. I want to know about their family. I want to know about their finances. I want to know what's important to them. Once I've gathered that information, I don't introduce the concept of collaborative after I've discussed the litigation process. It depends on what that client asks me. And it depends on who referred that client and what my initial consultation on the phone was briefly with them about the different process choices. That will sort of guide which process I start with. If I haven't had a conversation with them on the phone, and that does happen also, or an email, then I do a lot of really back to basics stuff with every client, where I ask questions, I let them know that I've heard their answers. But the thing that helps me to connect better with the client is this piece that we just spoke about in this slide about choice not being all that it's cracked up to be. Is I need to be really aware of what I'm thinking and feeling as I'm talking to a prospective client. I need to know if I'm experiencing biases or if I'm experiencing, these are some of the things that Randy spoke about that lawyers are not trained to do, but we need to train ourselves to be aware of what we're thinking, because there's a lot of nonverbal communication and unintended messaging that lawyers can do to clients if they're not careful and if they're not aware of what they're thinking. I'll give you an example. You start talking to the client about an out-of-court settlement process where people don't use positional bargaining, they use interest-based negotiating. You discuss with them what that is. They then say to you, reflexively perhaps, that's never going to work in my case. My husband's a narcissist. Or that's never going to happen, and I don't think it's going to work, so what else do you got? And then the lawyer can, I'm not saying I do this because I don't, the lawyer can say, oh, you don't really have to do collaborative. There's also, litigation, and let me tell you about that. And then all of a sudden, you're like, forget collaborative, because my mindset is, I don't want to lose this client, and this client isn't interested. And if I want to get this client in my office, I better sell this client the product this client wants to buy. You need to be aware of that because clients will pick up on that. And that signals to them that you're not completely convinced that this process works. And later on in this presentation, I may talk a little bit about how I overcame my prejudices or biases about whether or not the collaborative practice works. I do share my own story. I definitely ask a lot of questions, and I don't know, I try and answer the questions that they've asked me, and I answer them as clearly as I can. We started talking a little bit about the law. I know we're going to talk about that a little later, so I'll hold off on that right now.
And we know that you have a practice that's not litigation, so obviously the people that are coming to you are not looking for litigation, but is there a certain order to how you provide them their choices?
Yes, and actually I have a product on my menu called the single sitting divorce consultation, where I will talk to them about the litigation process. But so how I sequence it, obviously they have people, well, in the pre-COVID era, watch the collaborative video to set the stage. So that's the first thing that we talk about. And what I find that does is invites a little bit more conversation about collaborative work, because a lot of people say, well, I'm collaborative, and of course I can get along collaboratively and blah, 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 because they're talking small c collaborative. So I think that's a nice introduction to the big C collaborative. And then Neil, like you, I have so many of them say, that's wonderful, that's great, I'd love to be that. But my spouse, partner, whatever, is a narcissistic, blah, blah, blah. They have personality disorder, whatever, and they won't do that shit. So that shit's not for me. And we do swear a lot in Utah. So I say, I completely, then I can say, I hear you, I get it. Let's explore how this would look in litigation. So we can explore how it looks in litigation. And while I do that, I will say, like, if there is a narcissistic issue or one of the multiple other varieties of mental health problems or opportunities to grow or whatever you want to call it, I can say that in litigation, the judge is only, or the commissioner, because we have a two-part system, they're only going to hear what each of you can get out in your documents you file with the court and which your attorney is allowed to proffer. So they get a very narrow scope of what you have to say. And if your spouse is truly a narcissist, they're going to be an SOB and just say just as much shit about you as you're going to say about them. Now, if you were to do this in the collaborative arena, we bring in a mental health professional, and we don't do it in an accusational way. We don't say, Yahoo is nuts, so we need this help. We say, the parties have this communication glitch, and this mental health professional can help us with what that communication is and come up with some strategies and ideas to help. That's code for identify what the issues are, because ones don't marry tens, and help their conversation. So I go through when they say collaborative is not going to work for me, I will go through the litigation spiel, and then I will just identify how the collaborative process is different and where it may actually be much more helpful and beneficial to the family. Because if there really is a personality disorder or mental health issue, you really do want your mental health professional to get in and dig in on that with the family to figure it out, rather than some third party who doesn't know diddly squat about the case, making decisions based on this, histrionic information that they've received in the courtroom. So I go through it that way. And then if they say, we have to go litigation, and I'm going to court and I'm out for blood, I say, also, I have this list of litigators for you that would be great, that will take your case. Because I actually have a network of litigators that I refer to all the time for people who do just want to litigate. Or I will say, I can take you through, I've taken a lot of very high conflict personality disorder cases just through mediation, and we get them resolved there. And if they don't resolve, then they go on to the litigator. But I have the team set up and the other attorney on deck to take it.
Great, thanks, Ann. And one of the things I like to always suggest to lawyers is when you're in this process of consulting, don't be afraid to bring in, to show the client or the potential client how the process actually works by bringing in a neutral. Don't be afraid to pick up a phone, even in the middle of a consultation, and contacting one of your neutral friends, whether it's an MHP because there's children's issues or a financial because there's financial issues, and let us join the consultation just to let them understand how it is a team process. Carol, you had some thoughts?
Mm-hmm. I wanted to underscore that I think one of my jobs in the consultation is to remind clients that divorce is an emotional experience for them and for their children. And I use a multitude of kinesthetic, visual, and auditory tools to help them experience that. And I remind them that divorce is never a neutral experience for children, as much as they would want it to be. And it's not for them either. And I use a mobile that you have above a child's crib. And I remind them that each of the animals on that mobile represents someone in the family. And the collaborative process, if they're starting to lean toward wanting to know more about that, has professionals that are specially trained to help each of those people on that mobile. And how has your communication been all these years? Well, not very good. That's one of the reasons people get divorced. And so I remind them that the mental health professionals are experts in communication, and that helps them deal with the emotional issues in a better way than they would in litigation, and that it helps them, as Randy was talking about the co-parenting research earlier today, that helps them have a better co-parenting relationship, which means that their children will be better, more well-adjusted. And then I have another visual that I use, which is a tree with big thick vines all wrapped around it, like Amazon and vines in the Amazon. And I tell them the story that one of my collaborative law attorney friends and colleagues who used to litigate tells, that the divorce process and what parents disagree about is the trunk of the tree. And wrapped around the tree are vines, which are the emotional issues. So the issues out on the trunk of the tree are the financial and the parenting issues. Usually that's the two things parents argue about. But you can't effectively get to those issues without dealing with the emotional vines that are wrapped around. And they seem to really resonate with those metaphors. It helps them get into the emotional part of what they're going to be dealing with divorce, and they can start to see the value that mental health people bring to the collaborative process.
Thanks, Carol. Randy?
Yeah, to your point, Carol, to piggyback on what you're saying, and I love your tree metaphor, which is, I use that as my logo, actually. So thank you for that. I often will normalize. We've been talking a lot today. Neil spoke about it. I love attorneys who talk like therapists. So Neil spoke a lot about validating and normalizing and helping them to know that we get what they're feeling, and we get what they're thinking, and we get what they're afraid of, and we don't expect that they expect that this is going to go well or easily. I think that's a really big key, but we want to communicate to them that we believe it could go easier and it could go better. I talk with them often about, of course, I start every session with, of course, you two can't communicate, you can't solve problems, you don't know how to speak with each other, you're angry, you see him as a narcissist and you see her as bipolar. Those are the two I hear all the time. Of course you do. And if you knew how to do these things better, you probably wouldn't be getting divorced. And so I normalize that immediately. And I suggest that that doesn't mean that they can't be involved in a collaborative process. What it means is exactly why they need to be involved in a collaborative process, because we are going to teach them how to do things that they never knew how to do before. And the hopes are that they're going to come out, they're going to emerge from it better with themselves, better in their next relationship, better with their children, and even better with that narcissist ex-spouse. Because right now they're dealing with what I say, the business of getting divorced or the business of co-parenting. No longer do you have to change this other person's personality so that you can sleep with them at night. No longer do you have to get along with your mother-in-law because then that makes your wife or husband happy. This is the business of getting divorced, and we're teaching them skills and giving them opportunities to emerge more whole and better. And so I think it's really, really key that we don't try to negate that, but we actually embrace that. Yes, we understand this is how you see that person, and we want to help you to be able to see it a little differently and to address it a little differently. And I think that's key. And one more thing, I think Carol mentioned, or it's been mentioned, the judge and choices, and I think it's key that they know that in this process, that they lead the process, they get to decide. We don't tell them how their process should look at the end of it. We want to help them to carry out their vision. And of course, they're both going to have somewhat different visions, although I think there's more similarity than there are differences in people when they're going through this process. And we want them to know that they get to decide. Much like me as a psychotherapist, I don't tell people how they should live their lives because it's not my life. I just want to help them to get to where they want to be.
Thanks, Randy. You know, Carol talked about using visual aids. One of the things that that I use and that we encourage our MCT members. In fact, when you join MCT, we send you 6 of Joran Jenkins' posters. So she's got posters that talk about the divorce process, a roadmap to the collaborative process, words that can be used. These are great tools for helping clients and potential clients to understand a little bit more about that collaborative process. So now it's time to talk about, we've done some of this, but let's talk about how we identify the issues, and how do you get to understanding their hopes and fears? And how do you do that?
Well, I explore, first of all, they'll tell you straight up what their hopes and fears are. So that one is kind of, it gets there. And then I go with identifying issues and interests. And a lot of times they're woven together because they've got this interest. They want the kids to be doing really well, but the issue is their SOB spouse. How do we deal with SOB spouse? I'm looking at the slide now because I'm a little delinquent in my preparation on what exactly I'm supposed to talk about. But so we go through, as far as the issues, what does work in their communication and what doesn't work in their communication. And a lot of times when clients are talking to me, it's like, well, Bob didn't pick the kids up from soccer, and then the kids ended up soaking wet in soccer because he was with Bambi. I'm like, oh, well, if you were in an intact marriage, what would you do with the kids at soccer? Would you have gone to pick them up? And so I bring them back around to how would you deal with this if you were in an intact marriage and family? And can we I hear what your issues are. How can we manage those issues of your frustrations and communications? Manage those issues so that you can still meet your interests. And a lot of the problems revolve around relationships between them, money, fears about money. So we really actually identify and explore a lot of the fear-based stuff. And I will explore with them that if you're trying to have a conversation from a position of fear, or if you're a cornered animal, that's not going to work. And depending on I'll do it with both parties, whether I have the person who's going to be cornered or is afraid that they're going to be cornered, or the person who knows what the angry reaction is going to be from their spouse because they're going to feel cornered. And we really work on reflecting and identifying the other person's experience to navigate those issues. I have no idea if that got to the question that you were looking at.
I think it did. Neil?
Yay.
So by this point in any consultation, let's call it the middle of our consultation. We have the beginning, the middle, and the end. So in the middle of the consultation, identifying the issues can be obtained, as Carol said earlier, mining for interests. Mining for interests is nothing more than what Sherry Goran-Slavin and Victoria Smith from Toronto, Victoria's from Toronto, Sherry's from Cincinnati, have lectured on, is a way to get at the heart of what's going on for the clients. Are there custodial issues, as Ann just said? Are there financial issues? And if so, what are they? You get to that by asking questions. I do all of that before I actually discuss process choice, because it's during that conversation that a rapport between you and the client becomes established. And they can then hear more clearly, once you know what they wanted to tell you and what's important to them, how they're going to be able to do it. So interests and concerns are really important. And that identification of the interest is what I call a joint enterprise between the attorney and the client. Once you've been able to identify the issue and the client then relates to you, which is slide 8, Eric, as Randy mentioned, the client is going to be telling you a lot of very personal information, both about their finances and about their kids, but even more importantly, about their relationship with the spouse. Randy mentioned earlier normalizing a fact pattern. I don't know if she got into what that actually is, and I'll let Randy speak to that if she wants to later, but it actually lets the client know that what they're experiencing isn't so out of the ordinary that you've never heard it before. And they don't feel like they're bizarre, and that, okay, well, A, this lawyer has heard this a number of times before, and B, I'm not alone. I am not so crazy that, I feel like I'm the only person who's ever experienced this, but I want to feel like I'm the client right now. I would like to feel like this attorney understands it because he's dealt with it before, and I don't have to be humiliated, shamed, and embarrassed because other people have gone through it as well. This helps to build the rapport. This is relating to a client. It's in this stage that we discuss options with the client about different strategies that we can use going forward. I want to find out what's important to the client. Are they motivated by money and financial security, by the reputation that they have in the community, by the relationships they have with other people? Is time a concern for them? Now, I'll tell you, all of these things are a concern for everybody, but it's important to know what is more important to this particular client. Some of the options we discuss at this stage of the consultation is, do I write a letter and introduce the collaborative process? Do I introduce myself? Does the spouse even know that this spouse has come to see an attorney? Do I help them draft an email because they find that easier to communicate with their spouse by doing that because they don't do well in person? Or is an in-person discussion something that they can do well with their spouse? And if so, how can I help them to have that conversation? Do I give them the promotional materials to give to their spouse? I do all of those things, but it depends on what this client conveys to me, either verbally or non-verbally, as to what they want. And I'm able to give it to them after I've gathered enough information about their life.
Great, thank you, Neil. I think one of the keys also, and you got into this at the end there, which is how do I, I've sort of got a client that's ready to go collaborative. How do I deal with the other side? And I think that's truly when the neutrals come in. I think that we are probably the best people to talk to both parties, whether it's together or separately, and give them the comfort of what this process brings to them. Randy, you had some comments.
Yeah, I do. First of all, Neil, again, there you are being a therapist. I don't have to tell anybody about normalizing because you did it so well. And I think the key statement you made is we want to help them to know that we don't think they're crazy, and we come from a place of non-judgment. I think it's critical, no matter how they're speaking, no matter what their tone is, no matter how much anger they have, no matter how sad they are, that everything that they're experiencing is what other people experience at different levels at different times during the process. And that we're not here to judge them. We are creating a safe space for them to, one, let some air out of that balloon, and two, to listen to them, hear them, and understand from them what they believe needs to be in place in order for them to move forward in their lives. So I'll actually ask that question. So go back, could you, Eric, to slide number 7, please? So in terms of identifying their issues, I really want to go from problem talk to solution talk. And I want to help them to identify what really needs to be in place in order for them to move forward, whether it's through this divorce process, within the next year, within the next 5 years. Let them have a vision, because I truly believe as a person that when we have a vision, we can move toward that. It's, you know, if it's just the problem talk and I want to get away from this person, okay, you want to get away from this person, but where do you want to go? What's your goal? What's your hope? What's your dream for the future? And then I ask, so not only what needs to be in place to make this happen, but what can get in the way of that? And then we get to their fears. When we understand what they believe can get in the way, we get right to their fears. And the next thing I go to is, okay, what can he or she, what can your spouse, your partner, what can they do to derail you? Tell me what it is that you know, because they know it really well, that they do that really gets you riled. And let's talk about how you might be able to manage that differently. And let's talk about how I can help you to manage that differently. And conversely, what do you know that you do that derails your spouse? Because we know, everybody knows which buttons to push when they choose to. And again, from problem talk to solution talk, because the metaphor I use is if we continually look in our rearview mirror when we're driving, we're going to get in a crash. But if we look through the dashboard and we look forward, we're going to get to where we want to go. And so I think it's key for them to know we understand they don't know how to do this. We're here to help them to do this. And that we have, I haven't heard this through the webinar, but I've been wanting to say it. We have a team of professionals who have discipline-specific skills and shared knowledge, shared skills, shared values that we are going to come together and help to move them through a process in a way in which they have not been able to do before. And I think that that's really, really key, that they understand the benefits of having the two attorneys, a financial neutral, a neutral facilitator, or coaches, whatever, or child specialists, whatever it is that they need. We can offer them what they need once we understand what they need and what can get in the way. So
great, thanks, Randy. Carol?
I wanted to say a couple things about the issues as well and helping clients ferret them out. I remind clients that divorce is a human experience that has legal, financial, co-parenting, if they have children, issues. It's not the other way around, but most people come in thinking of legal, financial, custody, and so forth. But if we can get them to connect with the human part of themselves, we're starting to get to their interests. One of the interests I hear very frequently is, I want my kids to be okay. And that opens the door to talk about what the child specialist does, what the mental health people do, how is your communication that I mentioned earlier. And Randy, I use that rearview mirror metaphor as well. It's a great one. I use it throughout the collaborative process to keep reminding them. And that the mobile that I mentioned earlier, as Randy just said, each professional on the collaborative team has expertise to help specific people and all of the people on the in the family. And with communication, we have a handout called Our Language Matters, and I start educating them about that right in the beginning. Which do they feel more comfortable hearing? I'll see you in court, or let's figure out some options. I mean, most people say, I'd rather have the second one. So, and depending on what I get in the consultation, I have a lot of different handouts that I give them about peacemaking, consensual dispute resolution, things like that. And another handout that we've developed is reasons collaborative may fail. And it's kind of going at what Randy, you were saying. How do you derail your client, your spouse? How does your spouse derail you? And these things, if they take them home and share them with their spouse, often they see that we have the tools and skills to help them not repeat in their divorce process what they've done in their marriage process. And one other one I wanted to mention, I'm happy to share these with people if they want to email us, is, are you ready to mediate your co-parenting plan or collaborate about your co-parenting plan? And it's very insightful. I've had clients who thought they wanted to litigate after doing that questionnaire say, I realize I need to change my attitude here, and I see that this would be a better process than letting other people decide what our children's time with both parents is going to be. That's it.
Great. Thanks, Carol.
Mhm.
Eric, let's see slide 9. So let's talk about what we should or possibly should not talk about in the initial consultation. Neil?
So this one is a very interesting one for me, and it follows my general personality. When we were in law school, and this is for all you lawyers out there, in law school, we were always told, don't talk about yourself, don't get too personal, do not let the client know anything about you. That was like taboo in law school in the 1980s. When we first did our training in collaboration in the early 2000s, we were taught, don't talk about the law because the law can overshadow everything. So what Pauline Tesler talks about collaboration in the shadow of the law, which means that the law is primary and collaborative is secondary, which we don't like. That we collaborative professionals don't want that. We want collaboration to be the primary focus, not the law. So we're taught to not talk about the law. But as evolution has gone in the collaborative community, people still want to know about the law. So we now talk about the law as collaboration in the light of the law, rather than in the shadow of the law, and how the two things dovetail. I'm very different. I've always spoken about my own experiences and about my life. It's how I connect to people. Everybody is different. Some people are more private. I am really, really hard on the sleeve, not very private. People know how many kids I have. People know how long I've been married. People know where I met my wife. I tell them all kinds of stories, and I'm going to tell you guys a story at the end of this presentation that's very embarrassing, at least it is for me. But when I do talk about the law, and I do it very early in the process, I never give definitive answers because there aren't any. The thing about the law is it's unpredictable. Even if you have child support or spousal support guidelines, there's a lot of discretion with the person wearing the black robe. And therefore, we cannot predict with any degree of certainty any answer to any question. There are ranges of possibilities that we talk about, but I try never to give an exact answer. I don't exaggerate a client's position or the result that can be achieved. I adopt both sides of the story. I give examples of how it would go for both spouses, and I use ranges and not absolutes. I do not ignore the law. A client wants to know that I'm an attorney. If they wanted to go to a mental health professional to talk about those issues, that's their next step. Sometimes they've already been to mental health professionals and they've taken care of some of that stuff. And they may have even come to me because a mental health professional referred them. But they're referring them to me to talk a little bit about the law and what they can expect. It also takes some of the mystery out of the divorce process. I think it's important that we talk about the law. And I think it's important that we connect with the client as early as possible in the way that we do it best.
Thanks, Neil. Ann, what are your thoughts on this?
As far as my relating to clients in my personal story, a lot of times the people will ask me, why do you do this collaborative work rather than the litigation? And I'll go ahead and tell them that it was, impacting, the stress of it was impacting my health to a degree that was unacceptable, we will say. And so that, I think, drives home a lot of it. It really does share what the stress is like on the attorneys. Clients don't realize, because everybody, or most of them, come in with this idea that divorce is awful, divorce is terrible, it will ruin your life, I will have no money when I get out of it, etc. And so I share with them that I experienced that. I mean, I didn't end up with the no money part, but it was the stress, the negatives were not worth the benefits for me. And that's why I made this transition. So right there, we have a connection of like, oh man, if it was that bad for you, then maybe we should look at how you're doing it. So that kind of goes to some of the things we learned in law school, which is don't tell them about you because no one cares, or it's not important, or it doesn't inform their case. I think with collaborative work, it does inform their case. I also let them know about, like, if you're in a litigation setting, you are bound by the court's calendar. And if the judge says you will be here on this day, sometimes we will only have 3 days to respond to something. And so if you're out of town or traveling, that really impacts you in the negative as well. So this process is really helpful because you have more control. Now, do you have total control? No, it depends on how you and your partner are willing to work together to keep your interests paramount and work through your issues. But in comparison to what a litigation setting is like, where we can tell you what the outside limits are, but other than that, it's up to the personality of the judge and the way the stars align. They have much, much more control in a collaborative process, more so even than in a mediation process, because that's still adversarial. So we talk about what their expectations can be, what the range of possibilities is. And we narrow it as much as we can, but it can only be narrowed so much. And it always comes back to how long is this going to take? How much is it going to cost? Blah, 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 blah. And I don't have answers to all of that. I can tell them what the range has been in my experience. And it will depend on their ability to work together with their clients or to work together with their spouse. Also, we talk about the fact that their experience is what their experience is, and that their spouse has probably experienced the same facts, but through a different lens. So they're going to see it and experience it differently. And by being reflective, they can actually get there. When I'm talking to litigation clients, or when I did talk to litigation clients, it wasn't about being reflective and empathic and empathetic. But I do really work on that, and I work on some of the strategic language, whether we are just going to mediation or whether we're actually going in the full-blown collaborative participation agreement case. Having empathy, being empathetic and reflective is really helpful to understand what is setting off the other person, because the triggers may not have anything to do with the actual issue. So they can work through that. Again, the whole control part, there is no control in these cases. We have to see how they unfold. But we can determine the pace of how this case is going to go. Sometimes I've had a case where we met because I had very small children and it was during the COVID era. We met for 1 hour every week and just did chewable bites, because that was when the kids were down for their nap, or they could play on their iPad or whatever. So we could construct how we managed the case that worked for their family, which was not anything that you could do in a litigation setting at all. And I mean, I work hard I don't exaggerate with what the situation can be. And when I give them examples of how things have happened or worked out, I give them goods and bads. And one of the big questions I always get is how often does this fail? How like, do they make it through? And I will say in my career, I have had 2 collaborative cases that had a signed collaborative agreement that went to litigation. So I've been doing this since 2008, and 2 of them have failed. So if everybody is invested and they really commit to the participation, and I tell them it's not easy. This is not kumbaya. This is not everybody gets along. We handle some high conflict stuff, and we bring in a collaborative team and professionals that can navigate that stuff and get them through it, but do not expect it to be easy. Sometimes it is more work to be vulnerable and empathetic, but at the end, the product, the resolution is more durable and it's better for everybody. I also talk about the fees, because yeah, it's a big load to start when you're bringing on board all these collaborative professionals. And I'll just give them like the basic rundown of what a litigation case is going to look like with their issues, the range I've seen with that, and then the range that I see with collaborative work. And I find it to be much more financially and emotionally efficient and respectful. And that is just not something that they expect to see. But being as I have a 100% collaborative practice, I can tell you from my billing, it is much more efficient for your clients to do this in the collaborative process, because you get it done because they're invested in it. And then so you just have more clients to keep your income as the professional the same as it was. But it's something that I really do talk about. That is one place that I will go. I couldn't do it before I had 100% collaborative practice because I didn't have the breakdown and the numbers to support it. But I actually do have the billing model for it now. So that's what I do.
Great, thanks. And in initial consultations, oftentimes they turn to me as the financial and ask me even what's the law or what is, and of course I have to acquiesce to, well, I can only tell you my experience because I'm not a lawyer. But one of the things I always like to do is, while I might tell them some parameters, as you say, talk about ranges and those types of just general concepts, I always like to carry a story or two in my back pocket of how cases I've had that have settled that didn't come close to following the law. So it sort of shows them that collaborative, we may be guided by the law, but we don't often follow. Brandy, you had a real quick comment.
Yeah, I do. The other thing is really key. Ed mentioned to you that I work on the research committee for the IACP. So a lot of the clients' questions can be answered by referring them to the IACP website, looking up the research data on how many of these cases settle. We're at I chair the committee for Florida. We're like between 95 and 98% of cases are settling. They take between 4 and 6 months. They can look at how much the cost is. They can understand what makes it more difficult and how that difficulty raises the fees. And so as far as that, I think it's a really critical thing for everyone who's listening to pay attention. If you're working on these matters, complete your surveys, because clients want to know this information, and they also want to know it's not just your opinion that you think it's a better process, but the data will show you why it's a better process. One more thing, often as MHPs, they will come to us and they'll ask us, what do you think will happen in court? Stay in your own lane. That's all I want to say. Don't even go there. Redirect the conversation to, that's why we have a team of professionals working together. Because I've been in the inside of a courtroom maybe twice, and I choose not to be there. And so I think that's really, really key. It's seductive. It's a seductive conversation because you've been on a lot of these matters and you have some ideas about what might happen, but you don't want to go there.
Neil and Ann, I have a very quick question for you. And does any of this change when your consultations are not in person?
Yes. So thanks for asking that question. But like anything, Ed, in the age of COVID, there's an evolution for me, an evolution of what I call COVID consultations. In the earlier part, when we were ejected from our offices and people were no longer coming to see you in person, there was a lot of telephone calls. And what we tended to do, what I tended to do, I can only speak about me, is along with my partners, we would give a lot of information, more so over the telephone than we would have in the past, because we're not meeting with the person. And they're desperate for information. And you need to get info. So instead of having a 20-minute phone call and setting up a consultation in person, I might be on the phone 1 to 2 hours, which was a long time to be on a call with somebody for no money. It's not a great business model, actually, because they're getting a lot of free advice. And by the end of that call, there's a strategy about what to do or not to do, by the way. And that evolved. Then we started having shorter conversations where we were setting up Zoom calls. We had Zoom accounts. My assistant would send them information sheets. There are certain things in New York that we have to do when we meet with clients. We have to tell them what their rights are, and we have to get an acknowledgement that they've been told their rights. I do a client intake sheet like you do when you go see a doctor on a clipboard. We sent that over so that I had a lot more information. They would get credit card authorization forms so that they could pay for their consultation. And then the consultation would be online in a Zoom call that I invited them to. The next step had become outdoor dining facilities. People could go to outdoor dining facilities, and you could actually meet, at a restaurant outside if it was nice weather. I'm fortunate that I have a house that has a really nice backyard with multi-level terraces, umbrellas, and an awning, like tables and chairs and flowers and floral arrangements and hand sanitizer and face masks. I had a meeting with 7 people yesterday here at my house. And it was like amazing because there's nothing like an in-person consultation. There really isn't. It's a lot easier to see everybody and for everybody to see you. It's a little bit more relaxed, and there's no risk of having technological difficulties like some of these, video conferences can have. That's what I'm doing now, and that's how I started, and I prefer the in-person.
And when I asked the question, I think you shook your head no. So let's hear from you.
I'm going to be zippity zappity here. Most of mine is the same. The one thing that is significantly different is I can't put the client in the room with the video and make them watch it with the door shut. So I communicate, my assistant does the initial intake, and then I zap them, which is my term for email, the links of things that I would like them to at least have in their hands so that we can have that conversation. But most of my initial meeting via Zoom is remarkably similar to my initial meetings in the office, with the exception of interloping furry people that come into the screen. But I mean, most of it is the same. And then I just email them the forms that I would normally hand them in person. So they don't get a nice little packet, but they get verbose emails with a lot of attachments. And that is it.
Great, thanks. So, as we're going to talk about what is the most important thing for the client, but also as we come down to our ending, I'd like to hear, especially from our attorneys and from our mental health professionals, during the process of this initial consultation, you're assessing the clients, or the potential client, and you're assessing whether the case really does fit into collaborative. I'd like to make sure all of you touch on that as we talk about what is the most important thing for the client. Let's start with our mental health professionals. Carol?
Mm-hmm. I've covered a lot of how I assess with different questionnaires and so forth. And I think that, I think someone referred to it earlier. We believe in our community here in Southern California. We just say every incoming case is going to be a high conflict case. And then we're not surprised. And we believe with some of the other people we've trained with that collaborative is, in most cases, the best process for even high conflict people. And you'll hear these terms, narcissist, borderline, bipolar, etc. Unless there's severe mental illness or addiction, we still assess that they're appropriate for collaborative. We've even paused cases if someone needed to go to alcohol rehab or even mental health treatment, hospitalization, and then when they come back, we resume. So in general, that's how we assess that
Great, thanks. Randy?
Yeah, the first word that came to mind when you asked what's most important to the client is safety. I think that every client we meet with wants to know that they have a safe space to be in, and to be emotional in, to be scared in, to be distressed in, to be in the same room with their spouse in. So I think, to me, that's key, that they understand that we as a team, we're kind of like the container that is going to help to keep them safe. And I think they want to understand that when we're talking about the interdisciplinary process, I think they really want to understand, why is this so necessary? Why is this so important? Why do we need each one of these professionals? And so I think we have to talk to them about how we are going to be efficient, cost effective, what seems to be a very expensive process because there's all these different professionals involved. I think they want to know how we're going to make it cost effective and efficient. How do we know that that's going to happen? I think they want to know that we're knowledgeable, that we're skilled, that we're prepared. And I think those things are very, very important to them, that we're going to help them to get to their best outcome. And that is for them as individuals and also for their families. And I think that's key. So if you keep in mind that word safety, to me, there's nothing more important than that for a client.
Great. Thank you, Randy. Neil?
Yeah, I'm going to say I don't have a lot to add to what Randy just said. It was outstanding, that answer. But in brief, what I would say to the question of what is most important for a client, they need to have their questions answered. Whether the questions are law or process, all of their questions have to be answered. That's my answer.
Ann, do you have anything to share in terms of what you think is the most important thing for the client?
I think, are my earbuds working?
Yes.
Okay, good.
We hear you.
I think they need to feel safe in the process and protected and part of the team. And I think when you're in the process, if all the collaborative professionals are working effectively together, this is something I learned from one of the old school collaborative guys, you won't know whose attorney is whose, because it's such a great brainstorm. And so if the client can really feel protected by that in this process, they can be vulnerable to participating.
Great, thanks. So let's try to connect the dots, put an end to some of our thoughts. I'm going to go around the panel and see if you have anything final to share. We're going to end with Neil, who's got a very interesting story for us. Carol, any thoughts?
My thoughts are, again, that as Neil was saying, the client's questions need to be answered. What's most important to them? And I think throughout the presentation today, we've interwoven, focused on what are their interests, needs, goals. Sometimes those come in the form of a question, but not always. We have to mine for them. And if we've done our job in helping elicit from them their needs, their hopes, concerns, values, they will choose collaborative. We don't have to choose it for them or sell them.
Randy.
Yeah, so in sum, I think it's critical that we communicate our passion for this process, and not just because it's our opinion, but because we know that it really serves families well. We have to be compassionate and understanding. We have to help them feel heard. We have to be able to talk with them about our other team members. And that, to me, I think is a key in connecting the dots. I think when we refer them to another client, if we're doing to another professional, if we're doing the initial intake, we want to be sure that we're referring them to professionals that we have synergy with, that they're going to hear similar or the same things from another professional than they hear from us, that they know that we all work together well. I think that that's key, and that we are going to all work together to bring our, again, discipline-specific skills together to help them to get through this in the best way possible. So normalizing their struggles, normalizing their fears, helping them to feel safe, and listening to what they need is key.
Thanks. Ann?
I think connecting the dots includes really cultivating a collaborative community with collaborative professionals, as well as lay people and participants who are cultivated and really participate in that. Because I think when that collaborative community is cultivated, it really amplifies the collaborative energy and synergy, and it radiates. So I have found in Utah, cultivating that community is absolutely key, which involves a lot of luncheons.
Great. I want everybody to know, unfortunately, we never got a good enough connection for Carol Ann to completely join us and talk. She has been adding to the conversation through the chat, and we've been sharing many of her comments. For some last thought here, Neil.
So a word of encouragement for people who have joined this webinar because they've said to themselves, why am I not getting enough collaborative practice cases? Which is really the question that every practice group has experienced since the beginning of collaborative practice. My story started, I was an associate and a junior partner at a large New York City law firm. And I was in the middle of a litigation with a very mediation-oriented fellow in New York City who said to me, I can't believe you're a litigator. You're so easy to talk to. He said, I just learned about this new process. I do a lot of mediation, but we just got back from Chicago. We went to the Collaborative Forum. Would you be interested in coming into the city for a meeting? I, of course, not being able to miss an opportunity for a meeting, I said yes. And I went as the only litigator who was in the mix of 14 people. They were all, this is back before it was an interdisciplinary process. It was all lawyers, but they were all mediators. And I was the only litigator. I'd never been trained in mediation. I never even thought about mediation. In fact, the reason I went to the meeting and got into the group was because I figured these people would be referring me business because all of their collaborative cases or mediations would fail. And my firm was encouraging the young lawyers to do whatever they could to get new business. And there was no such thing in my firm as mediation or collaboration. So I was involved with this group. We started the New York Association of Collaborative Professionals, and I didn't have a case for 2 years. I never had my first case until I was doing this for 2 years. I never got trained in mediation until my second year, but something clicked. I was in the presence of these amazing mediators who were unbelievably brilliant and unbelievably emotionally intelligent. And even though they were lawyers, they were so much better than any lawyer I had ever dealt with. I found myself gravitating toward them. They became some of my best friends. We had deeper conversations. We shared about ourselves. I did the mediation training. That light bulb in the beginning of this presentation went off in my head. Oh my God, I now have another skill that I can add. Even if I don't have the chance, I will know how to talk to people better. I learned how to understand other people. I learned how to understand myself. And I learned how to communicate far better than I ever was able to in the past. I then did training after training after training after training. So when you talk about educating a client, the first step to educating any client is educating ourselves. Because it wasn't until I was educated that I was able to do what Randy said. Believe in what you're doing. Be passionate about what you're doing. And talk about team practice because you know it works. Because if you don't believe it and you haven't educated yourself, you're not going to be able to convince somebody else that it's a process worth pursuing. So for me and for anybody listening, I think it starts with educating yourself and believing in yourself and being able to talk about your elevator speech about why this process works and why it's great because you know it. Because if you don't know it, they're going to sense that you don't know it. That's my experience.
Thanks, Neil. That's a great closing story. I tell you that one of the things that I promote all the time through my collaborative team is that the best way to sell collaborative. The best way to convince people about collaborative is through your own competence and confidence. So that's what we hope to achieve. I want to thank our panel. This has been a wonderful 2 hours of discussion. Again, I want to thank Neil Kozek, Carol Ann Mazza, Ann Cameron, Dr. Carol Hughes, and Dr. Randy Heller. We'll leave their information up there for a few moments. We want to thank all of you for joining us today. We invite you to join us on Fridays at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're there from about 4:30 to 6. And join us on our happy hour. We have wonderful open discussions. We hope you will join us then. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good day.
Thanks, Ed.